All right, and for this midweek podcast, I am joined by Joshua Cutchin. How you doing, Josh?
Doing well. Doing well.
And initially, we were going to have both Mike and Red Pill with us, and we were going to deal finally with our show on night terrors, which is still upcoming in the future because both of them could not be with us tonight. But that gives us the opportunity to address something else I wanted to address, and I think you're the perfect person to have this conversation with. So,
Yeah, when you suggested that we talk about this topic, we're being really coy right now. I have some opinions, so I'm looking forward to it.
well, what I'd like to do actually, I'd like to. I did an interview a couple weeks back with Miguel. I'm not going to try to say his last name off the top of my head, but it was on his book Meet the Hybrids. Mendonça, I think it's Mendonça is his last name.
That
Um,
sounds right.
and as much as I liked both of the guests, I had some issues with their stance on the whole extraterrestrial issue, and I got a lot of different feedback, which we'll address. But I'd also like to talk about the use of hypnosis, and really, I want to talk about the arguments against the ET thing. So if anyone wonders why, and I think both of us are in the same camp that we're not really overly fond of the whole extraterrestrial hypothesis.
I'd say that's a fair statement. I don't like to rule out anything really, but at the
No,
same
no.
time, I've gone on the record a lot saying that it's a very tidy answer for a very untidy phenomena.
And I started reading today, Eric Oleia's book, Illuminations, and he should be on the show hopefully in the next month or so. I haven't set a date yet, so I don't want to jinx myself here, but he's talking about that as well. How it seems like you have one camp that's, well, this is all hallucinations and hoaxes, and the other side is like, oh, no, 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 it's extraterrestrial, and he's like, where's the middle ground here?
Yeah. I haven't had a chance to read Eric's book yet, but I've heard him on a couple of different podcasts, and it seems like I think that he is onto something. I really do.
Oh, I think he's most definitely on to saying he may not have the answer, but he has a piece of it.
Well, and again, the thing that I always like to come back to, I mean, it may be a piece of the answer or a part of the answer, a part of the puzzle. I don't think it necessarily has to be, the be all and end all solution as long as it moves us in the right direction.
Yeah, yeah. And he had a very interesting intro written by Jenny Randalls, who I've always had a lot of respect for, and who has always been kind of ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that assessment as well.
She's the one that coined the term the Oz factor.
And
She was investigating Men in Black early on. Has always kind of been willing to stick her neck out and look at alternative ideas that weren't just extraterrestrial when a lot of people were not willing to do that. And she should
yeah,
be mentioned. She should be mentioned in the same breath as John Keel and Jacques Vallée, and most people don't even seem to know who she is.
yeah, I would definitely agree with that. She's someone who has been very good about not being beholden to any one solution. And what's more, she also has a good deal of field experience too. It's not just that she's just an armchair person like like me, but she actually has had a lot of experience getting out into the field. So I have a great amount of respect for Jenny.
Yeah, yeah. So it was kind of neat that she wrote the intro to Eric's book, and I forgot she had written it. I was reading it, and I'm going, "Who's writing this intro? This is really interesting." Oh, Jenny Randall's right. Okay,
Yeah, exactly.
so so let's look at this idea of hybrids. Now, when I had Charmaine and Miguel on, they're very convinced that what's happening to them and these other people is a very physical extraterrestrial presence in our midst. And the first thing I take issue with, which has nothing to do so much with the hypothesis, is the use of hypnosis.
Mm.
I was kind of open to the use of hypnosis for a long time. I didn't know a great deal about it until I had Paul Kimball on a show, and Paul absolutely abhors the use of hypnosis. And I went through and I listened to him and I talked with him about it, and then I did some of my own research and found out that for the most part he was right. Some of it, of course, is opinion. It's not necessarily fact or whatever. It's his opinion on it, which is but the facts he was laying out were all pretty dead on. And that led me to feeling like, well, maybe hypnosis is not the best way to do this. So I was more interested in her experiences pre-hypnosis, but I wasn't getting real like detailed answers when I asked her what she remembered, pre and post hypnosis.
Yes, and regarding the hypnosis thing, it's important to realize that not all types of memory function the same way. Not all types of sensory input function the same way. Something that I looked into with my forthcoming book on smells is that individuals have a really hard time recreating a smell picture in their mind. You show
Hmm.
someone a picture and they can actually you show someone a picture and they can usually sort of recreate it or envision it in their mind's eye. But your mind's nose doesn't work so well. You don't, according to many sense psychologists, they don't think that many people actually have the ability to recreate a smell. Uh,
Really?
and obviously that has implications for any smells recovered under hypnosis. So this idea that somehow you can literally recreate what someone experienced just by putting them under, yeah, it doesn't really hold any water.
I mean, it can at times help people remember details they would have forgotten, and those details have at times been verified. Someone might be able to remember a license plate, for instance, that they saw but didn't retain in conscious memory. But really, what hypnosis does is it relaxes you, puts you in a more suggestive state. And if you have somebody who already has a set belief system that's running your hypnosis, someone like, say, David Jacobs, they're likely to lead you down the path following that belief system.
Right. That's something I was going to allude to, is that I don't think it's necessarily so much. Yes, there's some problem with the actual method, but in this field in particular, it seems like it's a special problem with those who are actually implementing the method, just in terms of being professionally certified. We don't have a lot of those people in this field.
Well, that's true too. That's true. People learn how to do it, and then they use it like it's a tape measure.
Exactly, exactly. I think it probably requires a little bit more training. I mean, and the thing that always scares me about it is that you're basically clunking around inside someone else's brain.
Yeah.
Who knows what you're going to kick over while you're in there if you're not flat of foot.
And if you're having an unusual experience to begin with, and you're using hypnosis to kind of recreate it in your brain, I mean, first of all, memories are not stored like a file on a hard drive. They're recreated every time we access them. So every time we access a memory, it changes it. So
Recreated and rewritten. Yes.
yeah. So if you do that and you're saying, okay, now we're going to put you in a suggestible state to see what else we can dig out of there. Maybe what's there isn't something they can dig out very easily. Maybe it's something. Maybe nothing else was there in their memory, and so their brain is going, well, these pieces have to fit together. It's like waking up from a dream that didn't make any sense, and your brain's trying to go, no, wait, maybe this happened there, and maybe this happened there, and it's trying to make logical sense of it because it realizes what you're remembering doesn't work in the real world.
Yep. Now you're preaching to the choir on this one.
So I mean, it's almost like I feel like anything that was recovered under hypnosis is subject to a big asterisk of may not be true.
Well, I think it should be presented as supplemental to
Yeah.
other corroborating evidence or other, if someone has missing time and has wounds, and there's actually strange burn marks in the yard. Well, then yeah, maybe we should listen to the testimony under hypnosis. But if literally all they have is this testimony that they've given under hypnosis, it definitely should be viewed with a little bit more of a skeptical eye.
Well, I think even if they have the burn marks and stuff, we're still capable of just creating something if we don't have the information there.
Well, that's true, but well, you know me, I don't trust anything in these fields. So, yeah, but yeah, no, you're totally right. I think it can help shed light on things, but it's not at all something that we should be using as the backbone or the core of recreating these events.
And I had also listened to an interview with Miguel's co-writer of the book, Barbara. I forget what her last name was, but um, she is very much of the extraterrestrial belief system. She has the list of races and where they're from and this and that. And I'm thinking, okay, how much of this is bleeding into your hypnosis sessions?
Right, right, and it's something I mentioned this to you earlier, but I remember I brought this up with Greg Bishop, and he refers to it as the Spider-Man could totally beat up Batman conversation. Whenever things are cataloged and they're put into these this elaborate taxonomy, I really do raise my eyebrows. The aliens from Zenebo Ganubi are coming here, and they're the evil ones who it starts to sound like, as I mentioned earlier, it starts to sound like a Dungeons and Dragons manual, in terms of all, with a bunch of stats
Yeah.
and such. And it
And
just, I don't. Sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I mean, obviously, I feel like there's some resonance in there with like Fey folklore, where they're all different types of fairies. Um,
Hmm.
so I think that there is some sort of validity to that multiple race idea, but I don't think it's quite as literal as a lot of people want to buy into.
Well, plus, if you look at the number of different entities that have been encountered over the years, there must be a billion different races visiting us.
Yeah, like the bananas covered in terry cloth that that were seen, I think, sometime back in the 70s. Yeah,
Really?
yeah, that was one of the stranger ones from the Robert Albert Rosales humanoid index. One that Greg always brings up is the giant bananas covered in what looked like terry cloth. So yeah, I mean,
Wow.
I guess if you want to say that every single sighting has equal weight, then yeah, we've got a cornucopia of races visiting Earth. I just personally don't feel like that's the case.
Yeah, and it's. I don't want to say it's not necessarily logical because, well, the UFO phenomena is anything but logical. Um, it, let's actually address why we feel the extraterrestrial hypothesis falls short. Because, all right, you want to start on this one?
Well, do we have how many hours do we have? um, you know, to me, if you start even on the basic scientific level of what would need to be accomplished to bring entities from outside, even something as simple as outside the solar system, not to mention the nearest possible candidate for an inhabitable world, it is way beyond what we can currently understand scientifically. Now, granted, any sufficiently advanced technology will appear like magic. I realize that,
Right.
but that really doesn't. That's, I think, one thing that goes in the anti ETH camp. Um, the methods, I think, are a good indicator that something isn't entirely on the up and up. If we're to believe a lot of abductees, the medical procedures that they go through are highly invasive. We have better ways to collect DNA now as humans than any of these drills and these these things that you
Right.
see in these cases. So it doesn't sound like an advanced. It does not sound like an advanced civilization to me. It sounds like theater. Um,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
those are two of the things that I keep on coming back to that really sort of push me away from the extraterrestrial hypothesis. The other thing is how how truly resonant these aspects of the UFO phenomena are with things that are established to be very Earth-like. The similarities between uh, UFO reports and altered states, I think, is something else that pushes me away from the ETH. And probably the thing that pushes me the most from the ETH is the high strangeness. It's the reality warping aspect of the phenomena. If it's literally scientists coming from a distant star system, then witnesses shouldn't be surrounded by synchronicities. They shouldn't
Yeah.
be, having these sort of moments when they're able to peer through the fabric of reality. And so all these things in aggregate really make me lean away from the extraterrestrial hypothesis and more towards an idea of something along the lines like a valet control system, control mechanism, or one of my personal favorites, the idea that there's just some sort of alien intelligence, alien in the sense of being non-human, in the sense of being foreign, that is interacting with us and is just constantly changing masks. There's a
Yeah.
great, if anyone hasn't seen it, the cover for the reissue of Passport to Magonia is actually the wallpaper on my phone now. It's a gray alien that's holding up different masks, and one is like a fairy lady, and one is a 1950s three-eyed alien, and another one is a devil's face. And I remember speaking to Red Pill Junkie about this cover when it first came out, and he said, "Yeah, the really cool thing is on the original artwork, which is not visible on the cover." He says you actually see that the gray alien itself is a puppet with a hand inside it, which I love, because I think that has a lot more. I think that has a lot more to do with what we're really dealing with than some of the more conventional ideas that have been propagated for the past 70 years or so.
Yeah, yeah, and I would totally agree with that. I didn't realize there was a hand in there. That's great.
Yeah, I
Um,
love it. I wish it's the one piece of UFO art that I would actually consider buying if I could ever get my hands on it.
so, I mean, I think the first time I really pushed against the whole ET thing, I mean, because, reading Whitley Strieber and stuff was fine. Even though he proposed other ideas, he didn't discount the idea of extraterrestrials. I had read a lot of Bud Hopkins stuff and so on. And I've mentioned this before. It was reading Kenneth Ring's stuff, the Omega Project, where he compared the after effects of near death experiences and UFO abductees that made me stop and go, now, wait a minute. If these things are just extraterrestrial, why would this happen? And it's a very strong connection between these two experiences, which suggests that the experience is not what it seems. Either the near death experience is somehow connected to ETs, or the abduction experience is not what it seems to be, which is a physical craft coming down and taking people. At around the same time, I realized that my work with magic and my interaction with various things was also very similar to. It was something Strieber wrote that actually had clicked with me, and I went, "Wait a minute! I'm having these same experiences without UFOs, without grays, without any of this other stuff. It's like a completely different perspective, but some of the experiences are exactly the same."
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly I'm
Yeah,
like, so maybe why are we assuming the mask of extraterrestrial to be the correct one? We look at like ancient aliens and we say, well, this has been going on through history, so aliens have been here through history, or maybe something's been here through history, like you said, with different masks.
yeah, yeah. And the thing about, especially about Whitley, I mean, I feel like he for so whenever another thing that really grinds my gears, so to speak, is whenever someone is absolutely 100% sure of what they're dealing with. And look,
Yes.
I haven't had this experience. I haven't. But the people that I really admire who have had intense experiences, some of them are still able to say, you know what, I don't know. I know what it looked like. I know what it seems like, but that might not be what I'm seeing. I'm thinking of, I mean, Whitley has done a pretty good job of being open to a bunch of different interpretations of this, I feel like. Um,
Yes.
and again, someone who's changed throughout the years. But like, you look at the stuff that's happened to Mike Clellan. This is someone who has had some profoundly strange things happen to him, has given it an intense amount of thought, and still has come out the other side saying, I don't know, this is what I'm noticing, this is what I can say for certain, but I realize that what I think I'm being presented might not be what the true nature of what this is. And those are the attitudes that I rally behind, and those are the attitudes that I am in support of. Whenever I have people say, I know that they're aliens, and I know that they're doing this, and I know that they're doing that, and this is their agenda, I I 9 times out of 10 I just switch off the podcast.
Well, the thing is, there's no proof, and it seems like in some cases belief, strong enough belief, and if you can pick out and choose a couple pieces of data that support your case, people take that as proof, and proof is something very rare, really, when you think about it. If you had an extraterrestrial spaceship with a little physical gray alien that you could interview, Okay, that's about as close to proof as you're ever going to get. I mean, there's always a chance someone made the spaceship and genetically created a gray alien, but in the end, you could say, well, if you had that, I would at least have to say, well, yeah, maybe you got it.
Yeah, and even so, though, I am so skeptical that in terms of some of this stuff, that part of me would wonder if yeah, you've got this little gray alien standing beside the president, but you know. I like to play devil's advocate so much that I'd be like, well, is that really, or is it is it a psyop, or is what
Right, right.
is whatever this is presenting itself as a green alien, again, a green alien, just
Yep.
to
Yep.
fool us. Yeah, I've gotten to the point with a lot of this where I don't think I will ever be satisfied with anything that's presented to me.
It may very well be that we can never fully understand it, but I think it has, which I've said a million times, I think it has something fundamental to do with our understanding of reality. I don't think we understand reality for what it is, and that's why the paranormal just kind of drifts in and out of it, and we go, well, this doesn't make any sense. It does. We just don't see it from the right perspective.
Yes, yes, I totally agree. It's the line about the Mothman in the Mothman prophecies, that adaptation, where he's comparing Mothman to a window washer who can see a mile away, a mile further than the people on the ground. Uh,
Yeah.
it's not that there's anything really supernatural about it, but just that there's sometimes just a different perspective.
Now, when we deal with the subject of hybrids again, I don't have any doubt that some of these women, as Bud Hopkins has written about, have had these abduction experiences, what seem to be pregnancies, and probably even met these beings on UFOs, what seem to be UFOs. Um, Again, all whatever the mask happens to be, because you see the same thing in fairy faith under different circumstances.
Right.
And so I don't doubt these people's stories for a moment. And I'm sure it is as gut wrenching as it can be to think that you have a child out there that you have no contact with. Whatever the reality of that child might be is where, I'm not really sure where to put that.
Yeah, and I think that that's an important thing to note, is that I think that we probably overestimate the number of outright deliberate liars in this field. I think that
Yes.
most people who come up with this stuff, and because why would you, it's hard enough to be somebody who writes about these things and hasn't had an experience, the ridicule factor. I can only imagine what it would be like to come out with some of these things. I feel like people are at least presenting what they have perceived as the truth.
Yes.
Um, but I feel like, I just feel like I feel like a lot of experiencers don't realize that they're being played by something, or that a lot of times you don't have people who really are aware of how wishy-washy simple straightforward perception can be.
True. True. Um, and even some of the bigger names, like I feel like when I read The Key from Whitley Strieber, I sat there and I went, something doesn't feel right about this. And then I was like, either Whitley's actually making this up, and I think I believe Whitley to be a fairly honest individual.
Hmm.
Um, it's possible, he may have misinterpreted things or even dramatized things a little bit because he is a writer, or his memory has dramatized things. But anyway, I leaned away from the idea that he made up the key and instead went with, I think they're just playing games with him. It came across almost like a Men in Black type encounter, but a little bit different. And there were trickster elements all through it, and it's never acknowledged by him.
Right, and it's funny because people are so quick to crow about people being disinformation agents who were appear on. I think anybody that couple of people I've known, anyone who's in this field long enough, gets accused of being a different disinformation agent, and yet we never
Sure.
think about there being ET disinformation agents who are playing the exact same game on the other side of the coin. Um, And yeah, at the same time, if you look at what was in the key, um, I I agree. I think that Whitley is, by and large, a very truthful individual. But if you look at the some of the goal that the key was written for, the environmental messages I believe were in there, and just
Hmm.
the general spiritual bent of the entire thing, it would be kind of hard to fault someone for embellishing something to try to enact a little bit of positive change in the world after they've become as high profile as he was at that point, if that makes any
That's true.
sense. So
Yeah, the message isn't we believe people should send you money, Whitley. Write this book and tell them to send you money, you know?
exactly, and it's come back to it comes back to something that Patrick Harper talks about, the idea that things can be true and not be literally true. He talks about how sometimes art can present truths. If there's a beautiful love story, some of the stuff that has happened in that can be so true and so resonant. Doesn't mean that these two people literally fell in love, no, but it's still true in another sense.
And yeah, that Patrick Harper's ideas are very subtle and I think hard for a lot of people to grasp if they haven't looked on outside the extraterrestrial idea.
Right, right, sorry, go ahead.
Because he really works with sort of like what is reality here.
Yes, no, I definitely agree, and I've tried to think about why people are so invested in the ETH, and the only thing that I can really think of is that, I mean, I think some people just haven't been exposed to an alternative
Sure.
view, but also I think sometimes it's probably just easier to wrap your head around than some of these other ideas that are talked about.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to think there are extraterrestrials coming here is an easy thing to accept for most people, I think, at this point. Um, it's a simple answer. It explains exactly what it looks like most of the time.
Right.
And you can just throw out the high strangeness stuff because that's the really weird stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
And
you and I are drawn to the high strangeness stuff because, as Jacques Vallée has noted, that's some of the most interesting stuff and might reveal the most about the phenomena. But I think a lot of people and a lot of researchers go, no, those people were just crazy because look at this account. This doesn't even make sense or fit with anything else.
right, right. And I mean, it's gotten to the point where that's what I'm most interested in now is the high strangeness.
Yeah.
It's become the focal point of what I try to research, and it's become the focal point of what I enjoy, the sort of media that I consume. And I yeah, I don't know what to make of it. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the point is to keep us on our toes.
Keep us questioning.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that makes about as much sense as anything else I've heard proposed.
The and the problem with the paranormal in general, no matter what, whether it be Bigfoot or ghosts or strange disappearances or UFOs, is a lot of times people will, with complete certainty, throw out ideas that also aren't proven as the explanation. So, for instance, with David Paulides' work, you get a lot of people to this day saying, "Well, it's clearly Bigfoot."
Oh
Okay,
Lord,
but
yeah.
but we don't know if Bigfoot even exists. So how can you take something that's also an unknown, I assume there's something that people are seeing when they see Bigfoot, whether it be a physical creature or some kind of paranormal manifestation. I don't know. Bigfoot. I'm really on the border on Bigfoot. I'm not sure what to make of the whole thing. But the problem is you can't take one unknown and explain another unknown and act like this is absolute proof. Here's what's happening. And it's like, okay, you can believe that. That's fine, but you can't prove that.
Yeah, that's one of the more prevalent logical fallacies that I see. It's I think at one point someone suggested that the manna uh, that was eaten in the Bible was actually angel hair from a UFO. In spite of the fact that I'm pretty sure that we've never had angel hair that's been kept for any amount of time, and B,
No.
I have no reason to believe that there's any nutritional value in angel hair. But that's the thing, is that people get into this one mindset, and they don't want to bring any nuance in there. I mean, for example, everything's an alien. So now Bigfoot's an alien too, and no, maybe not. Or everything is spiritual. Well, maybe not. Um, and I yeah, I can't. Again, I don't think that there's necessarily a one size fits all answer for any of this stuff. I think it's part of the reason that we haven't seen more progress on figuring out the quote unquote paranormal, is because there isn't a one size fits all answer, and that's what we're hardwired to look for.
Well, yeah, yeah, that's definitely it. In fact, I don't remember. I think it was Jenny Randall's in the intro to Eric's book. There was saying that we're so busy stuck in the spots that we've been stuck in for the last 50 years that nobody's really made any progress on this stuff.
Right.
It's all, again, it's all people arguing it's extraterrestrial. No, these people are all crazy, or hoaxers or misidentifying things. No, they're extraterrestrial. And instead, the phenomena hasn't, no one's made any significant progress toward figuring out what's really going on. And even when someone says they're interdimensional, well, I like that idea. I thought that was really interesting. But of course, that also falls into that category of, we don't know if there are other dimensions. We
Right.
don't fully understand what interdimensional means. It's certainly possible there are parallel worlds. It's possible there are higher dimensional worlds, and I think that's where John Keel was going a little bit with the higher dimensional worlds, where they could see time differently.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's that whole thing that it's the Slaughterhouse Five idea that Mike Clellan likes to talk about, where I believe it's the Trafalmadorians talk to the protagonist and say that you view time like you're strapped to the front of a locomotive. We view it like a mountain range.
I like the idea that, I mean, with our limited perceptions, and our perceptions are very, very limited. I don't think a lot of people understand just how little of the world we see. And
Mm-hmm.
even what we see, our brain fills in so much of the patterning. They have those great videos where, you're following the basketball while a guy in an ape suit walks behind them.
Exactly. And we can't see ultraviolet light. We can't see radiation. We can't.
Right.
And we
And
can't.
these are and these are only the things we can measure. If we can't measure it, we don't know if it's there. So what's outside that scope? What's in other directions that we've never even thought to measure? That could somehow be inhabited.
Precisely, and that's also, hey, here's another example of why the ETH hasn't really ever held water for me, is since we are so specialized to exist on this planet, and we are specialized to perceive the things that we do perceive. um, I find it hard to believe that parallel evolution on another planet would give us a bipedal uh, creature with two eyes and a nose and a mouth, and fingers and toes. I feel like true alien life would be represented by something so foreign. Maybe there is an alien whose primary means of navigating its environment are radiation detecting organs.
Right.
Or organs used to detect dark matter, or organs used to detect something that we have no concept of. And that's something that always gives me pause whenever you see Adamski style Space Brothers or something. It's like, really, is it really possible that something could be so close to us, having existed in a completely different environment?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, we and I've always said we may have life in this solar system that we simply don't recognize. What if there's some
Yeah,
sort of gaseous life on Jupiter that's intelligent, maybe far more intelligent than us, but exists as a gas rather than a carbon-based life form?
I think it's totally possible. I mean, I was just listening today about a virus that was discovered in recent years that if we hadn't already established the parameters for what life is, we might have had to have rewrite the book because it was so large and functioned so similar to uh, to more complex organizations of life that it almost sort of broke the book, broke the rules on what a virus was. So yeah, even I think, I mean, heck, with even in our solar system, there might be something on Earth that we don't quite perceive. And I think that if you look at the direction that a lot of people are thinking with this idea that maybe plants have consciousness, this whole pan consciousness idea, I think we're sort of edging towards that a little bit more.
I think too, it goes to the idea that maybe consciousness came first,
Yes.
or at least was consciousness is integral to matter. Like matter can't exist without some level of consciousness behind it. And whether it be just a simple organizing consciousness that's not necessarily self-aware, or whether it be self-aware consciousness in different size systems, from human down to cells to the earth itself having its own sense of consciousness. I really do think that, my gut says that's what's going on, where that consciousness is absolutely integral to matter. It's not a side effect of matter. And we see more and more research kind of poking in that direction very reluctantly.
Yeah, I feel like this is the first opening salvo in the materialist, non-materialist civil war that's impending. And I feel like a lot of the stuff is a lot of the mounting evidence is definitely pointing us in the direction that consciousness is fundamental and consciousness is something separate. Someone that I've been doing a lot of listening to lately is Gordon White, who runs the Rune Soup podcast, which is a great podcast. He's a
Yes.
great thinker, and he was had a conversation with Greg Carlwood on the Higher Side Chats about transhumanism. And there was at one point Greg was sort of lamenting the fact that there's this big push for transhumanism and it's doubling down on materialism. And Gordon said, well, actually it doesn't matter. He's like, because consciousness is fundamental. You can't upload you're not going to be able to preserve this jelly and preserve your consciousness. He said they can keep on doing whatever they want to. They're not going to get there. So it really doesn't matter how much effort they put into it. And I think that is probably closer to the truth than a lot of people in the establishment want to admit.
And I feel the same way when we deal with things like teleportation. You're taking something apart, on a cellular, on an atomic level, and then putting it back together somewhere else. Well, for a flower pot, that might not be a bad thing, but for a human being, it doesn't necessarily account for consciousness unless you only assume consciousness is a side effect of the makeup of matter. So, what happens when you put a conscious being through that process if consciousness is not a side effect of matter?
Yeah, I mean that's an excellent point. Um, that I hadn't really considered. But yeah, that's a great point to raise as we continue rushing headlong towards towards technological Armageddon.
I mean, do they appear on the other side without life? Just the body, and it just kind of like is brain dead because
almost
there's nothing running it anymore.
almost sort of like a pet cemetery scenario, right? You come
Yeah,
across, but
yeah,
you're a completely different person. Yeah,
right,
that's a
right.
really interesting point.
I mean, and maybe it would simply stick with the body. Maybe consciousness is non-local and would just project itself along with the body,
Yeah,
connected on some level we don't know. But I think if we were able to successfully transport things and we found that people were not right on the other side or just completely lacking consciousness, that would be a good key that we really don't understand it.
yeah. The frightening thing about that is that you're not. Let's say that technology did exist. You're not going to find out until the first human subject goes through, because
True,
you can
true.
send through as many gerbils as you want to, and they're probably not going to any change in the gerbil consciousness
Well,
won't be noticed.
if the gerbil lacks consciousness completely, though, you would notice.
Yeah, that's true. If it's just a
So,
comatose
yeah,
gerbil.
yeah. If it's just a vegetable on the other side because there's no driver behind the wheel anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Comatose
and
gerbil.
we create a world of live ghosts.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
They didn't die, so they're not leaving, and they're really
yeah.
confused.
I think that we're really, I think that we're outpacing. I think that technology is outpacing our understanding of the way that reality works in a pretty startling way. I mean, I I've been hearing a lot of stuff recently about bringing back extinct species, and really, in a lot of ways, I don't have a problem with that. But I feel like, in the case of species that we've had a hand in destroying, I think that it's perhaps even a moral obligation to bring them back. But species that
Sure.
died out of natural Earth events, I think it might be that, don't be too hasty on that. There might be a greater reason for why this species of cave bear it died off in the first place. You know.
Well, it had its time, and then cycles change.
Yep. Well, and what it's really tied to is this I think this sort of this nostalgia worship that we're stuck in a cycle of right now. We don't want anything to change nowadays, even though we're struck with, even though we all need change now more than ever, as a species, as a society.
Hmm. The other thing I wanted to get into too was the whole implant thing. Now, when I did the interview, the hybrid interview, she was saying that she had numerous implants and felt that they were militarily implanted, that the military had something to do with this. I don't remember if that was gotten through hypnosis or if that was just what she felt. But there's also a situation with Strieber where he heard people coming up his driveway. He went to reach for something, and then he realized there were people in his room. And I don't remember exactly. It's in Solving the Communion Enigma. He talks about it, and he was very upset about it because he was like, these weren't alien in any way. These were people who were in my house, in my room, while I was sleeping.
Huh.
And it makes you wonder it makes me honestly wonder what the military really does know. I don't think they have crashed saucers because I don't think the phenomena works like that. Um, I can't say it's impossible, but from what I've seen, if the government can't keep secrets, if we've learned anything over the years, is that the government's fairly bad at keeping secrets.
Well, this. Well, now thinking about what other people have said uh, in the past, Stanton Friedman always says, well, they kept the Manhattan Project secret, which I agree, but that wasn't a 70-year secret. Um,
Right.
and B, there's a quote, I think it's from Keel, that Greg Bishop likes to trot out, which is uh, UFO enthusiasts aren't telling the government everything they know about UFOs. um, yeah, I mean, I think that it's one of those situations where if they do know something, it's a lot. They know a lot less than we think they know. And so every year you see these. I think it was just a week into 2016, and I saw something pop up on my Facebook feed about, is 2016 the year for disclosure? I'm like, no, probably not. Uh,
Well, every year is the year for
yeah,
disclosure.
exactly, exactly. It's just a constantly
Well,
moving clock.
it may also be that the government realizes how weird this phenomena is. And they may be maybe they are keeping track of some of the people who are having more regular
Well, I mean,
encounters.
the government has to be interested on some level. I mean, and we know
Oh,
for
I'm
a and we
sure.
know for a fact that they are. The real question, I think, is do they realize that it isn't nuts and bolts? And of course, this is my opinion, but how would a government disclose something of a of a of a high strange variety? Like, let's just go with
Right.
the idea that the UFO phenomena is consciousness based, spiritual, more along those lines. How do how does a government that has everything to gain from the materialist paradigm come out and say that? You know,
Right.
And
Right.
there would be people crowing that it would be, some sort of attempt at, government or government
Disinformation.
endorsement of religion, or something along those lines. Uh, that's just an impossibility for them. So yeah, I think that might have something to do with it. Is that the truth of whatever we're dealing with goes so far against the interests of the power structure that might be a reason that we haven't gotten big D disclosure.
um, so I just grabbed the Solving the Communion Enigma book. One thing I didn't realize, and interesting more so now, is that Jeffrey Kripal wrote the intro to it.
Really?
Who just wrote the new book with
Right.
Whitley.
Yeah.
Um,
Interesting.
but in a section called My Implant, he says he was talking about how he was getting a lot of hostility from his local neighborhood, or as he puts it. But already by 1989, I was feeling a distinct atmosphere of hostility from the local community, and so he had, all kinds of weapons and stuff like that because he was afraid not of the aliens but of a person attacking him.
Right.
He says, I heard a very distinct and immediately recognizable sound, the crunching of gravel in the driveway. It was easy to hear. The night was still and dead quiet. It could only mean one thing. There was a vehicle out there. I'd seen no car lights reflected on the ceiling. Therefore, it had approached with its lights out. I went from my half asleep state to full wakefulness. I heard a male voice in the backyard say, "Condition red." He said, "That did it. No question. We were under threat. I had prepared carefully for this. Beside the bed was a bank of switches that would flood the area around the house with light. Under my bed were 2 firearms. As I reached for the switches, a terrific shock went through me. There were people right here in the room with me. I saw a man and a woman standing in the doorway at the far end of the bedroom. I shifted my focus instead going for the shotgun. Had I succeeded in getting it into my hands, I absolutely would have blown them away. For an instant, they stood frozen. The woman was in front. She was perhaps 5'7" with long straight hair. As I turned to my left, reaching downward toward the gun, they arrived beside the bed. The next thing I knew, I was lying on my right side, and there were waves of pressure being applied to the left side of my head." And he connects this to how he got his implant.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean that's something that, just to turn things on its head. Maybe there are no alien implants. Maybe it's all my lab military follow up.
Yeah, or special interest groups who are following this, who have the money to do this stuff.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of these things are calcified foreign objects that people encounter.
Oh, sure.
But at
Some
the
of
same
them.
time, I have to stand back and wonder, perhaps it's just some sort of technology that we don't realize as being technology.
I mean, none of these implants have ever shown anything that is not of this earth.
Right.
They've showed unusual, unusual types of elements, like higher degree of elements than should be normally that we could normally make. I'm totally screwing up what I'm trying to say
No,
here, but
I know exactly what you mean. I've got a good example.
purity wise, the higher more pure versions of the elements that are normally
Yes,
found.
and there was a gentleman who in Yvonne Smith's book Coronado, it speaks about him having an implant removed and that he had lived with for since I think like the 70s or the 80s, and it was a majority of it, I think maybe 3/4 of the actual content was pure sulfur. So that's another example there too, where there wasn't really like a commercially available material that corresponded to someone, stepping on a piece of sulfurous glass or something. It just wasn't. There wasn't a commercially available common home material that could have been.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We're not seeing elements we're not familiar with, but they are organized in an unusual way, and that's not forming naturally in the body.
Right.
So, I mean, when Strieber says this, well, that's, that was not something he recovered under hypnosis. He remembered that. I remember him posting it in Unknown Country when it first happened. And he was very angry because he realized a person came in and did this to him. And as I said, when I did the hybrid interview, she was saying, she has 3 or 4 implants and she's fairly certain they're all government related. it it's one of those things where it's one of the only physical traces we get from UFOs. And there's no evidence that it actually comes from the UFO encounter.
Right. What you can say is that people who report encounters have foreign objects, just like you can say that people who report having seen a light in the sky may also have an abduction experience, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there is a definite link between the two.
Yeah,
It
and
just
I
means
mean
it's,
maybe there
sorry, go ahead.
maybe there is as far as the implants go. I mean some of them are implanted by whatever the phenomena is, and maybe some of them are military. I mean there are definitely people who, and I don't know if it's only under hypnosis that people have remembered having things put up their noses.
Right. Yeah, I'm not
And
sure.
I So I mean, if you're having that experience and you experience them implanting something in you, that seems like it would be part of the phenomena, but it could also be the government wanting you to think that.
Exactly. And like I think, sorry, go
Not
ahead.
to not to
Well,
sound
and
paranoid.
that's fine. Um, and I think about the size of these things, and like we're already talking about in our culture, nanotechnology. So I would think that a race that's coming from the stars would be able to, use nano trackers in people. Um, and so yeah, I think that sort of is argues in favor of perhaps it being a military thing, an earthly terrestrial source that's doing some these sort of implants, because it seems much more in line with where we are technologically versus where quote unquote they would be technologically, if that makes any real sense.
Yeah, but I'd almost think that we would be more advanced than the size of some of these implants. And then that makes me think, are the implants just there to be found?
It's Chekhov's implant, right?
Yeah, it's stuck there for the sake, or maybe it's to distract from whatever the real implant is. Maybe there is a tracking device, but it's very, very small, and then they implant something bigger. So you're going, well, here's my implant, when that's not what they're using.
Well, yeah, again, never ever take anything about this at face value. I think
Yeah.
that's I think that it's a huge it's one of the greatest sins of 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 ufology, is that we we believe what these things say that they're doing. We think that what we're looking at is what it appears to be. No, I mean it, whatever it is has not been able to evade detection, solid detection by Earth, confirmation by humankind, by being forthcoming with its motives, by being forthcoming with what its true nature is. It's just not the way it works.
So when we look at the whole, when people are saying, oh, well, these aliens are from Zeta Reticuli, and these aliens are from such and such a place, and these aliens are from such and such a place, I would have more interest, let's say interest in that, if every single person who had encountered the Greys was told by the Greys they're from Zeta Reticuli. But that's not what happens. Most of the time, they don't tell them anything about where they're from. If they do, a lot of times it's in almost riddle
Mm-hmm.
form. Um, but when they do tell them where they're from, it's from always different places. Back in the 60s and stuff, they were always from Venus or Mars or, um, a moon of Jupiter or whatever. Now it's, Zeta Reticuli or the Pleiades or whatever. And it's just, there's no consistency. I would think if we were being visited by extraterrestrials who were willing to tell us where they're from, they would be telling us where they're from. And it would be the same story to everybody they pick up. And you would have the same aliens doing it.
Right. You would think that the point of origin would at least map on to certain species. So the
Right.
mantids would always be from Zebel Ganubi, and the Greys would always be from Zeta Reticuli. Yeah. Well, and the thing that I wonder sometimes, I mean, rarely is there ever a follow up. It's like, well, we call it so and so, but you call it Zeta Reticuli. Instead, these entities are appearing to people, and they're using, you know, They're using earthly terms that have their origins
Yeah.
in Greek and Roman antiquity. Zeta, it doesn't seem to really support the ETH.
I think what it's almost like you had a dream and you're taking the information in the dream as absolute fact instead of maybe as metaphor or dream imagery, and you're trying to make it fit into the very real materialistic world that we're normally inhabiting.
Yeah, I mean it's I mean, you even look at interpersonal interaction. We use so many phrases and such that aren't meant to be taken literally either. I'm going to kill you, or I
Right,
died
right.
laughing. I mean, so why, again, I don't think that an intelligence as alien as whatever is happening would uh, be as clear and as straightforward.
Um, the other thing that there are other things that push me away from the extraterrestrial idea. I already discussed the first few, but things like Dr. Strassman's work with DMT,
Hmm.
where he's showing that these people in altered states are encountering grays. You find it with ayahuasca. You find similar stuff with shamanism, and all this stuff is related to altered states. And if it wasn't for some of the physical traces, burn marks on the ground and things like that, you could almost get away with saying that the UFO phenomena is simply an altered state of consciousness.
Yes.
It's the fact that there seems to be some physical level of it. Um, like someone will have a close encounter with whatever this is. Someone at a distance might see a light, so they can verify, yeah, there was a light there. They weren't an eyewitness to the close encounter, which might be happening in an altered state, but they were at least eyewitness to the fact that there was a light there. There was something physical there that they interacted with.
Well, that what's interesting to me too. I mean, you look at light phenomena in all of these different categories. Light phenomena associated with the Fey folk, light phenomena associated with UFOs, light phenomena even associated with Sasquatch, because that's something that people are actually talking about nowadays. And I think it is not coincidental that the pineal gland reacts to light. It's structured like an eye.
True.
Um, so I wonder if when we see these lights at a distance, we aren't seeing the true form there. That's what this thing really objectively looks like, and then once it gets closer, it's able to interact with us, and that's when we start co-creating with it, and grafting on whatever we think it is. So we run into this phenomena in the Pacific Northwest in the woods. We're gonna slap a Sasquatch on it. If we're looking up into the sky, we're gonna slap a flying saucer on it. And if we're in an antebellum home, we're gonna turn it into a Civil War soldier.
Right, right. and,
Possibly. I
and
mean,
you
that's
get
just
just the light. Yeah.
right. And that's just me. That's just me spitballing. Like, I don't. I personally don't want that to be the answer. That feels a little bit too straightforward to me. But it again. You gotta entertain everything, I think.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And when we deal with lights, I'm always fascinated by the work of Paul Devereaux, where he had his whole Earth lights theory, where he was showing the connection between UFO sightings and fault lines, and he's saying, well, these are Earth energies that are creating these lights, and if these Earth energies can create these lights, I don't think Paul Devereaux necessarily went here, but what if they're activating endogenous DMT in us that's then creating an altered state of consciousness? So you're seeing the light, which is a side effect of this energy coming from the earth, and that same energy is altering your consciousness, and you're then having a close encounter, even though the light is just a side effect of the same energy that's creating your altered state. The only problem I have with this is that these experiences then continue. So it's not like people just keep going back to that one spot and have an experience. They then go home 50 miles away, and 2 nights later they have another experience. It's almost like they've opened a doorway at that point.
Well, again, right, and also the thing that we keep on coming back to with, these synchronicities and these bizarre reality warping aspects of the phenomena too, don't seem like it would really fit that hypothesis very well.
True. Yeah, it seems like there would have to be another component mixed in there
But again,
somewhere.
this is what we always run into. Like, there's it's the reason that we don't have it's the reason that we haven't really made any progress. Another reason is that any theory, it has these inherent contradictions in it. Even the best theory that's proposed always has 15 outliers where you can say but this, but that, but the other,
Yeah.
and that's when the notion of deliberate obfuscation sounds like it might be a little bit more in line with what's actually going on.
I think some of my favorite theories have been obviously the demonic reality theory of Patrick Harper.
Yes.
I feel like that's one of the most complete theories. If it's not completely right, and I doubt anything's ever going to be completely right in dealing with anything, it is probably the closest to making sense of this phenomena that anyone has come.
As I've noted before. I mean, just the internal consistency of it. It really does account for all of those outliers that I just mentioned. There's always having read that book, there's always an answer, or always a reason for such outliers. I cannot recommend that book highly enough. I actually just bought my second copy because I'm giving it to Miguel as my thank you
Nice.
for him editing my upcoming book. So that's I'm gonna get to give that to him here at the beginning of April. But yeah, I cannot recommend this book highly enough.
I would say the other two that have struck me as being very interesting. The second one was Andrew Collins' theory of plasma intelligence.
And that was from LightQuest, right? Yeah.
Yes, and he he treats these things as, yes, they're intelligences, they're plasmas, they're right here with us, they've always been here with us, and if we get in the right circumstances, they kind of create a bubble reality between us and them. That's a little bit us and a little bit them, which is why it's never quite the same
Mm-hmm.
for two experiences. And again, that's another argument against the ET thing, is that no two experiences are ever exactly the same. It's not, I mean, you get some of the similar archetype, and you get the similar archetype going all the way back through time, but every experience has something that just doesn't fit with all the other experiences.
Well, it also explains why, extraterrestrial technology, if X is human technology, extraterrestrial technology equals X plus one. It's always just one,
Right.
it's always just one generation ahead of what we're able to accomplish.
And in reading Eric Goulet's book, I think he's definitely onto something as well. I don't know. The interesting thing about Eric's way of looking at it is he takes out the other component. He doesn't bring it in as as another intelligence.
Right. And again, having not read the book yet, I might not be entirely qualified to comment on this, but I think that if there is a flaw in his idea, it's the fact that he doesn't really account for the other intelligence, because I think that there is something that is an other intelligence that should be accounted for.
But what if that other intelligence is just us? What if it's our higher self manifesting through something that can communicate with us?
Yeah, I don't have a real problem with that. It lines up with a lot of the way that people will tell you how magic works. It sort of lines up with that too, and psi phenomena. But well, to me, it sort of comes down to I don't want to say that things that people wouldn't normally make up, but whenever you have a witness that is surprised by something, or sees nonsensical behavior, that's another good example. That to me sort of tends to go against that theory, because I don't think if this other intelligence is a reflection of us, is a mirror of us, I would think that there would be a little bit more of it reflecting our desires rather than, you know, I mean,
Well, I'm,
I don't think Joe Simonton wanted pancakes. You know, I don't think that I don't think that was one of his subtle desires that was reflecting back at him.
but it may not be desires. It might be because I'm thinking higher self, not just to me. Desires, especially earthly desires, are more lower self. They're the material level of things. I'm thinking, it's trying to guide us in a certain way. It's Jacques Vallée's control factor.
Or the Greek idea of the daemon.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, going back to Patrick Harper
Right.
and his whole daemonic, and that's not demonic reality. That's daemonic reality, DAI
Right.
instead of DEM. And of course, you have people who will look at this stuff and say, well, it's all demonic. It's all demons. It's all, and that comes more, I think, from just a religious upbringing where you see anything that is unusual like that as a manifestation of the devil.
Yeah, which I even as a Christian, I look at those claims and I'm like, really, we're told that the world works in mysterious ways and the Lord works in mysterious ways, except for unexplained stuff, and then it's all it's all demons. We're gonna slap a label on it. Yeah, I have a real problem with that. But yeah, but to me, okay, so I guess it's a simple misunderstanding because I would even perceive something as like a daemonic higher self almost as a discrete separate intelligence because we are using so much of our reptile brain all day.
Yeah. It's something we're disconnected from for the most part. I mean, that is one of the goals of most magical systems is to reconnect with that higher self. It's the goal of most meditation systems, although in very different ways, to reconnect to that higher self.
Right.
And you figure too, look at dreams. Dreams don't always put you in a situation you desire. Sometimes they're frightening. Sometimes they give you things you really don't want, but you may need to deal with.
Yeah, I mean that's true. It's something that we've talked about at length on this show is the effect of negative experiences and how they tend to impact you more than or have more lasting power than a lot of positive experiences do.
Yeah, and I mean, again, you could have something else tapping into your dreams, or it can just be us.
Yeah.
We'll get into that more when we talk about the whole night terrors thing.
Yes, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. And if anybody, actually, this might be a good opportunity if anybody wants to catch up on it and watch it beforehand.
Yes,
might give them a heads up.
What's the name of
it?
It?
I can't remember. The Nightmare. Yeah.
Okay, which is a documentary on night terrors and sleep paralysis that we're going to be discussing and then branching off from.
And it's pretty horrifying. I'm not going to lie.
I thought it was really interesting, is what I thought. I was absolutely fascinated by it. A friend of mine had recommended it, said it was really creepy. I don't tend to get creeped out, but I was like, all right, well, let's check this out. And I was just fascinated by the stories in there. And they're real stories of people who have had these experiences, but they sort of don't, they don't fit necessarily with the belief that it's simply the brain shutting off or staying, like your body's still asleep, even though your brain's awake, but you're still dreaming. Which
right.
I think is the common explanation for sleep paralysis. You've woken up, your body is paralyzed because it thinks it's still asleep, and you're still getting dreaming.
Yeah, and it's an incredibly refreshing documentary because of the way that it does present things. It isn't entrenched in a materialist paradigm, really. I mean, it's quite to the contrary. I thought it almost maybe leaned a little bit too far in the other direction, if you can believe I'm actually saying that.
Well, but what he did is he just collected the stories and got people's comments on them.
Right, exactly.
How did you feel about this? What else happened to you? He doesn't. There's no message behind it. He's not like trying to prove a point. He's just presenting these stories and reenacting.
Yeah, it's an excellent approach, and it works really well.
So yeah, if anyone wants to watch that before we do get to our sleep paralysis night terror podcast that will definitely catch you up on what we're going to be talking about. And of course, that also gets used as an explanation for UFO encounters. Oh, you're not getting abducted by aliens; you just have sleep paralysis. Except for all the people who weren't sleeping when they've had
Right,
encounters.
but this is when I throw this in there. A lot of them are in an altered state. You hear about highway hypnosis. People sort of spacing out. Pardon the pun. While driving, and that so possibly that opens them up to interact with this intelligence while people are sleeping. Possibly that opens up an opportunity for people to interact with this intelligence.
Sure. And I think that's the key. I think the altered state is very important here. I don't think it comes through on a one-on-one level like you and I would in if we're standing next to each other.
Right.
It doesn't work quite like that. We need to tune into something else.
Yeah. No, I totally think that's a big clue as to what's going on.
But I think that when again going back to the show on hybrids. I never want to say that. I mean, unless I really pick up that somebody's trying to be deceptive, in which case I wouldn't have them on. I think both Miguel and Charmaine were very honest in what they were doing. I believe that they believe what happened. Well, at least I don't remember if Miguel had any experience. Miguel had some experiences. I don't remember if we got into them. But Charmaine, as weird as the stuff she was talking about was, and as crazy as it made her sound, I believe she believes those things happened to her.
No, absolutely, and I feel like both of them were coming from a very earnest place too. I feel like they have a lot of good intentions for what this research can for a higher purpose that this research can present. I just when people again, I'm a hybrid. Have you ever had any tests done? No. Well,
right.
That's a little bit of a problem for me.
And I think that's a problem for a lot of people. That should have been maybe that's where they should have gone with the book right off the bat. Let's prove this. Let's prove there's something unusual about your DNA. The problem is I'm always afraid it's going to end up like the Sirius documentary that Greer did. It's like, here we have this alien corpse, and what was it, like 6 inches long or a foot long or something like that, and it was definitely anomalous. And he's like, we're going to get DNA analysis and prove that it's alien. And they go through and they talk about, well, one of the other things that tends to lead me away from the UFOs being extraterrestrial, the fact that they can almost summon them in the desert.
Well, and
if Mike were here...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
If Mike were here, he could attest that actually happened to him, that he stood there. I think he said he was on a beach one day and he said, I'd really like to see a UFO. And suddenly there was a UFO.
Yep. I mean, there are a lot. Of course, I try that and nothing ever happens. But I can understand why you wouldn't necessarily want to approach it from the let's prove this standpoint, because whenever I'm talking to someone who is whenever I'm talking to a staunch, atheist materialist, some of whom are my good friends, I never want to get into a conversation about proving God to them, because A, I don't think I can do it. And B, it's just, that's not what it's not what my spiritual relationship is. So I can understand why they maybe didn't want to necessarily approach the topic from that standpoint. But at the same time, you've got to be a little bit more transparent about what this experience means to you, and leave a little bit more wiggle room about what it could be. If this really is sort of a faith-based experience, then come right out and say that, this is my truth. It's not everybody's truth necessarily, or it's not definitely everybody's truth, if that makes any sort of roundabout sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I got a little sideline there, though, with the Sirius documentary. At the end, they find out that the DNA apparently seems to be pretty much human, and they just kind of gloss over it at the end. They just kind of tell you and then move on real quickly. And you're like, wait, that was it? So you did this whole hour and a half to tell us? I mean, it's still interesting because, if that's human, that's really small for a human being,
Yeah, I mean,
because it was not a fetus. It was I forget how old they said it was, but it was definitely like an adult who was only like a foot
yeah,
tall.
it's the rare example of them underhyping something. If that had been, a show on the History Channel, it would have been it would have been something that they would have taken and run with. Yeah, that was really surprising to me. But again, it comes around to this idea of, oh well, it wasn't an alien. Well, we buy into the ETH, so we don't really care.
Right, right. And instead of going, okay, well, it's not alien, but it's still interesting because what's going on here? What happened that made this person so small?
Right.
And I think the same thing of the Star Child skull. I mean, I don't know if the DNA analysis has ever been finished on it. I know Lloyd Pye was claiming it had very unusual DNA. Okay. But I don't know if it ever got finished. But regardless, yeah, my argument with Lloyd was, even if you get DNA that's not what we're used to, that doesn't prove it's a gray alien, which is what he was saying it was, because we don't have a gray alien. We would need a gray alien to say, okay, look, the DNA matches.
Right, and this is something that
And his roundabout argument was, well, we do have a gray alien. And I was like, we do? He's like, yeah, the Star Child skull. Yeah, and I didn't want to argue with him over it, but that's where this stuff
yeah,
fails.
because you're working backwards from a conclusion.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, and this whole thing, this whole idea of comparative DNA analysis is it's something that Bigfooters have run into for a long time, because there have been DNA tests on samples, and yes, they've all been inconclusive. A lot of them have said, unidentified, closely corresponding with primate, but it's never like, you never get this big printout that says Bigfoot DNA. You're not going to get that.
Right.
So compare it, compare the DNA and see if it compares or it has similarities with the Star Child skull, but you can't work backwards from the assumption that the Star Child has anything to do with gray aliens.
Exactly. Because as I tried to make the point, we don't know that gray aliens exist in any kind of materialistic, physical form.
Right.
We know people have encountered them. We know people have encountered them in altered states.
Right.
So even not in the context of a UFO encounter, just simply taking something like ayahuasca.
Yeah. No.
When I had
exactly.
when I had Gabriel Roberts on a few weeks ago, he said that he's encountered gray aliens in altered states. He's never had a UFO experience or anything that resembles one, but he saw those entities when he was in an altered state.
Now, of course, playing devil's advocate, the materialist hops in here and says, "Well, yeah, but he's seen gray aliens in media, so that's his mind generating that hallucination."
That's certainly a possibility.
Right. I don't think that really. I don't think that
explains it
all. Yeah,
all.
well, it's too consistent. I think. I think that you'd have people hallucinating big-breasted women a lot more if that was more like if that was closer to the truth.
You also get which then fuels the ancient alien idea, is that you see it in cave paintings. You see what look like gray aliens. And as Graham Hancock has shown, a lot of that is likely to be from altered states of consciousness. So what you're seeing is more rather than actual physical aliens coming down, you're seeing shamans and such experiencing these entities in altered states of consciousness the same way we are now.
Well, yeah, exactly.
And they're recording them on the wall.
Yeah. The one of the, well, in terms of like the image of gray aliens and where that came from, sometimes I wonder, one of the more convincing explanations, quote unquote, that I have seen from a psychological standpoint for the abduction phenomena is the birth memory hypothesis, because a lot of it does line up. The image of the gray looks a lot like a fetus. You're yanked from being in a dark, warm environment to this cold, sterile, brightly lit room where an entity comes close to you and projects love, and there's all this medical pageantry. So I actually think that's a really interesting and compelling idea. But there was this there was in some of my research from my next book. There's an article that I found by a gentleman named Dan Clore, who did an entire article on paranormal smells. And at one point, he's like, "Well, the funny thing about the birth hypothesis is that I guess it means that we should tell hospitals to make sure that their rooms don't smell like sulfur and ozone because that's what people are reporting in abduction experiences." you know. So again, it's that one thing that sort of shows up and rears its head and scatters the entire idea. But
But as you say, a fetus looks like a gray alien, but the people there, the doctors and such, don't, and that's what they'd be experiencing. So I think it fails
right,
there
exactly,
too.
exactly. Um,
Um, I've actually never liked that scenario. I always thought that was just kind of a cop out.
I think it's interesting. And I think again, I mean, if you look at a lot of these experiences that people describe having after abduction experiences, yes, there are plenty of negative ones, but you can't deny that a lot of them experience a sort of rebirth. And I wonder if we're talking about entities that deal in theater, if that might not be part of what we're seeing as an expression of rebirth. I,
Yeah, and that takes us back to the whole shamanistic idea. You
yes,
know,
exactly.
the shaman goes into an altered state, has this experience. Literally, at times, will have their entire body taken apart, put back together, and then they're released from the state. When it may have seemed like weeks, when they were actually only out for a day. Um, and it's different than the UFO phenomena. But when you look at the archetype, when you look at the stuff that's happening and the after effects of what happens, it's very, very
Right,
similar.
exactly, exactly, and that's one of the richer veins of inquiry that I think people should be looking at more and considering more. And this idea too that just the universe. I think it was Mike who said this, Mike Cleland. The the universe has a shaman quota that must be met. And regardless of whether you want to or not, it's gonna pick some out of the lineup.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so the after effects, as we were just talking about, and I mentioned Kenneth Ring's work earlier. When I was talking to Charmaine on the hybrid interview, she was talking about all this stuff she could do after, all the different psychic stuff and things like that she can do. You find this as a common after effect of UFO abductions. And there were people who were questioning whether or not she was just had mental health issues. As far as I know, most people who have mental health issues don't have these abilities. They
Right.
may think they do. Certainly, they may also think they're George Washington. But you see enough consistency there from what she was describing to what people with near death experiences describe to what people who have just as simple as I guess you can get with it, alien abduction encounters experience, which makes me think she had a very genuine
Right.
experience. And my question becomes how much of it has been colored by the person doing the hypnosis, by her own belief system, um, et cetera, et cetera. Not, I can understand why someone would think she has mental health issues. I don't know if that's the answer to what's going on with her, nor does she necessarily seem
Mm.
unstable.
Yeah, and well, look, so to throw a wrench in the works, I think there is some research out there about uh, children who have nonverbal autism showing a slight bump in psi abilities. I'm pretty
That's
sure. I'm
interesting.
pretty sure I heard that on an episode of Skeptico about a year or two ago.
Huh.
But having said that, yeah, I think what we might be seeing here is a little bit more in line with um a little bit more in line with the thing that everybody always throws out about Adamski is like, well, yeah, he might have had something happen to him and then just got I think with Adamski it was a little bit more overtly, I think it was deliberately deceptive, but
Yes.
maybe this is a variation on that where something did happen, but uh, perhaps she's interpreting it and interpreting subsequent events to be more than they really are. You know, maybe she had something happen to her and she is having moments of telephone telepathy that we all have. You know, oh, so and so's calling me, and is interpreting that through the post abductee lens.
Very possible, very possible. It's also one of the other things Kenneth Ring found in his research is there's what's called the encounter prone personality. There are people who are more likely to have these experiences, and one of the common threads was some kind of trauma as children, often physical or sexual abuse.
Right.
And if you have that kind of abuse, especially if you have it buried, you might have some mental health issues. In fact, you're likely to have some mental health issues, but it doesn't mean the experiences you're having are any less real.
Right, and you know that ties in again. That sort of ties into that shamanic thread too. You know,
Yes.
obviously, I'm not saying that not saying that emotional trauma is what shamans tend to go through, but just this idea that some sort of suffering brings you closer to what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, there was one other point I wanted to get to, and now I don't remember what it was. Huh. Oh, I know what it was. It was the idea. So, like when I had on Seth Breedlove, I think was
Yes.
his last name. Yeah. We were talking, and he was, talking about the Bigfoot encounters in some town here in upstate New York. I forget the name of the town, but
Whitehall.
anyway, uh, thank you.
Yeah, that's all right.
I'm glad you remember these things.
No worries.
um,
I listened to his
but
podcast, and so that's the only reason I knew it.
ah, and we were talking about that. We were talking about other things connected to this, like one person having poltergeist encounters, another one had a UFO land on her front lawn, all in the same time period as people were seeing this beast. And it's not something he goes into in the documentary or anything like that. And I'm just, and to me, that's part of the issue with this stuff is that, the ghost hunters just look at the ghosts. The Bigfoot and cryptid hunters only look at that. The UFO hunters only look at the UFOs. Instead of looking at that bigger picture, is there anything else unusual going on at the time of this UFO flap or when this creature is seen, or are people having other types of weird encounters? And if they are, and you do see it on a fairly regular basis, the question becomes what's actually happening here that's causing all these unusual encounters?
Right. I mean, it's well, and something else that you touched on in that interview was how there would be Sasquatch in the woods where the Sasquatch was seen. People would be pelted with rocks, and the rocks would be warm to the touch. And you said, but that's also something that you see in poltergeist activity too, right?
Right.
And this is something that I've been saying. This is an idea that I really like, and I think that there might even be a book in it at some point. But if you take some of these Sasquatch, the Class B reports from the BFRO website, and you look at what they are: strange smells, warm rocks being thrown at you, knocks and rappings in the forest. It all sounds like poltergeist activity. And I've often wondered, I mean, yes, a lot of times there is thick brush and thick woods where you can't see from where a rock would be thrown at you, but you'd think you'd be able to see something if you had a rock thrown at you. So yeah, I sometimes I wonder if it's that Sasquatch just happened to hang out in poltergeisty areas, or something else that I've wondered is you know perhaps Sasquatch manifests poltergeist phenomena or something along those lines. But yeah, here's one thing that I will say is that I these things are all connected in some way. And I'm not saying that, again, I'm not saying that this is all the same thing. It just might be places where the Venn diagrams touch, or where similar methods are being used by different phenomena. But there is something running through all this that we are not hip to yet for whatever reason, and we really need to pay attention to that. Because, and that again, I think you're exactly right. I think that's the reason why we haven't seen any real progress, is because we're in our own little, we're staying in our own little neighborhoods, and we're not really, visiting other areas of inquiry.
We're analyzing the mask rather than what's wearing the mask.
Yes.
And when you just mentioned that with poltergeist connection between poltergeists and the Bigfoot activity, and yeah, it's very similar. But poltergeists are generally, it's fairly well accepted that poltergeists are spontaneous PK energy, that they usually surround younger children who have emotional issues. They're hitting puberty, and often girls, more often than boys. And this stuff manifests from them. I remember, I don't know if it's in Eric's book, but I remember when he was on which show was he on? He was on I don't remember, but he was
Paracast, Banal
saying
of
that
America. He's been on a couple.
it was
Okay,
on Banal. That's what it was. And he was talking about how when these children are given psychological counseling, the poltergeist activity stops, as opposed to, say, getting an exorcism where the poltergeist activity may stop for a couple days and then come back even stronger. Because the actual issue, which is the stress the child is under, which is causing the spontaneous PK, hasn't actually been addressed. But when they go to counseling, they're actually addressing that issue. And thus the activity slows down. Now, obviously, there's not a bunch of 13-year-old girls running around the woods having Bigfoot sightings or having rocks thrown at them. But, it does seem to be a similar type of phenomena. And unless you see, I mean, to my knowledge, has anyone seen a Bigfoot throwing a rock?
I'm sure that there is some anecdotal report out there, but no, you don't see it very often. Like I said, I'm sure that there's some report out there, but I can't think of one off the top of my head.
Neither can I.
Well, and the other idea is, like, whenever people go out into the woods to wood knock, and they grab a stick, they find a good stick and they whack a tree with it, and they immediately get a response from Sasquatch. So Sasquatch just carries around a stick in case somebody knocks.
Hangs out in the woods,
waiting
for people to knock on trees.
And this is when, and this is when you have people say, "Well, it's clicking with its mouth." That's what's. No, come on.
Well, anything's possible, I guess. But I can tell you this experience I had. I was out in the backyard, and by backyard I mean out on the edge of fields in pitch blackness, and I had done a ritual, and I get done with the ritual, and I tap the staff I have 3 times on the ground. And it was on grass, so it didn't make any actual noise. This is 3:00 in the morning. I live in the middle of nowhere. And as soon as I do this, I get from the barn off to the side, which we've always referred to as the creepy barn, because it kind of looks like it looks a little bit like the front of the Amityville house with the face.
Hell no.
And it got nicknamed the creepy barn a long time ago. And from that barn, I hear knock, knock, knock at the exact pattern that I just tapped the staff on the ground. And I just stopped there and went, oh, it had to come from that barn, didn't it?
Nice.
But the thing is, there's a knocking response that I don't think there was a Bigfoot hanging out in the barn knocking on it.
Yep.
So I don't know what knocked back at me or what it was trying to tell me, other than I took it as a challenge to walk past that barn going back in, because I could have taken another route.
Yeah. Now, see, this is interesting to me. Sorry, go ahead and finish. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, you've had so many different things happen to you. It doesn't sound like you're afraid in any of these experiences, and I wonder, like, what's been the most frightening thing that you've had happen to you? This is completely off topic, but it just popped into my head.
Huh. There are things that should have frightened me, and it's not until later when I think back at them and go, why wasn't I really creeped out by that? That was probably one of the ones that really creeped me out, because I just got I got chills up my spine. And like I said, had it been any other building than that one, it wouldn't have been so bad. But I was like, oh, that one, great. And then I kind of stood there for a minute and I went, I don't want to walk past. I literally did not want to walk back in past that barn. And I had visions of like some kind of face popping up in the window or something. And I'm going, nope, I'm going to do it. I'm just not going to look at the windows.
Nice. Nice.
But I think that's probably one of the only experiences that really just chilled me. the other one, actually, I could think of one other that really kind of freaked me out, and I don't know that it was anything actually paranormal. But I had been walking along the edge of the field, and it was a cornfield at the time, and I suddenly got this feeling like something was there. I got this really bad feeling, and as I looked at the cornfield, I saw what looked like a disfigured monkey climb out of the cornfield and then just disappear.
I've never heard you tell this story.
No, well, the reason I don't is because part of me says it was dark out. It was just a trick of the corn moving in the wind. And I was freaked out by this really bad feeling, and that's why I saw this thing. But I don't know. I mean, it's not like I had a video camera running on it. It's not like there was someone else there who was like, nope, that was definitely a creepy monkey.
Weird. Just disfigured,
So
like maimed, or like just a
like demonic. Like something you'd see out of a horror
demon
movie.
monkey. Nice.
Yeah, it was like a demon monkey climbing out of the cornfield, and then it just stopped and dissipated. And I went, that was in my head. That was totally in my head. I did not really just see that. That was just a trick of the corn. And it creeped me out so bad I could not walk into that part of the yard for a long time in the dark.
See, if you hadn't had other things happen to you, I might be quick to write that off too. But with this, all the things that have happened to you, it seems like it would just be one more thing. what's one more anecdote?
True.
Here we go.
But it's one that I can at least come up with a logical explanation for. Some of the other ones, I'm lost. It's like I don't know what that was. When I was talking to Jim Harold, I recounted I think it's only in the Patreons section. We had heard a scream in the car with us when we got home from a concert.
Wow, interesting.
And we're sitting there talking, and we just hear this it's not even a scream, it's like a yell. And it started suddenly and ended suddenly, and it wasn't very loud, but it sounded like it was right there in the car with us. And there was no attack and no decay to it like a normal person yelling. It didn't like get louder and then trail off. It started, it was just, and that was it. And it went for like 10, 15 seconds, whatever, however long it lasted. And we just both stopped dead, listened to it. It stopped. And I think my response was something like, well, that was interesting. And my friend was losing his mind. He was freaking out. And he's like, what the hell was that? I'm like, sounded like a yell of some kind. And I get out of the car to go into the house to get something for him. And he's like, no way in hell you're leaving me here. And he gets out of the car and he's looking around, seeing if there's somebody around. Again, we're in the middle of nowhere. Right. So I start walking toward the house, and I'm walking under this big black oak tree we have. And on the ground, I see lights suddenly appear as if shined down from something, but just not beams, but just the lights themselves on the ground, multicolored and kind of swirling around sort of kaleidoscope-like. And I stop, I watch this for like 10, 15 seconds, and then it goes away. And I just said something like, lights, and continued walking. And he then realized how far away I was because he was still looking around for somebody. And he's just like, lights, what lights? And he comes tearing over toward me, to not be by himself while all this stuff is happening. But it didn't creep me out because, the yell was a little weird. The lights certainly weren't scary, but I can't explain either one of them in any logical manner. We both heard it. So it wasn't my imagination that we heard the scream. We both heard it crystal clear. I can't explain it because it wasn't like a normal person yelling. And it definitely sounded like a person, followed by these lights that couldn't have been projected from anywhere because I was under this thick black oak tree.
Yeah, and the thing that always strikes me about stories like that is like, what's the point?
Yeah, I have no idea. To me, it was just fascinating. It wasn't creepy. It wasn't, it was just kind of like, okay, that was interesting.
It's nuts. That's I don't even know what to do with that.
After the Ghost Hunters, I think I've told this story on the show before. After the Ghost Hunters, the last live one they did, I think, and it was pretty obvious in the special that Grant was faking stuff. And as disappointing as it was that it was so obvious, I can understand, they're on TV, they're live, they really want something to happen, but it seemed like only he was willing to go that far to kind of like pull something. And one of the first things that happened is he walks by this open doorway and you hear a voice, and it sounded like a tape recorder. And he stops and goes, "Guys, did you hear that?" And the other two guys are going, "Yeah, whatever." And they're almost like they had a hint that something was up and they were just going to try and brush it off.
Right.
And so he goes, let's see what happens. And he walks past the door again in the exact same spot. You hear the same exact voice again.
Mm-hmm.
So it was probably a motion sensor of some sorts. And again, they just brushed it off. And I'm thinking about that later. And I'm like, at least make it sound like not a tape recorder.
Right.
And I had been woken up. I woke up in the middle of the night, still dark, which is not always the case when I'm sleeping. And I'm laying there awake for a moment going, okay, go back to sleep, go back to sleep. And suddenly from my closet, I hear a voice that sounded almost exactly like the voice that they had on the Ghost Hunters thing. And I wish I could remember what it said, because whatever it said was completely ridiculous. And I just kind of looked at the closet and it said it again. And I went, okay, point taken. And I rolled over and I just went back to sleep.
Yeah, I would have been up all night.
And later I think back at it and I'm like, why the hell did I just go back to sleep?
Well,
or how? Well, how did that not creep me out when it happened? Because it didn't. But afterwards, I'm all creeped out about it. And I'm like, let me just double check the closet,
Exactly. And that's one of those things too that you run into is these people. Well, I think it's suggestive of the altered state hypothesis that you have these people who will see horrifying things and be like, oh, they just went back to sleep. I read a story about these teenagers in Wisconsin who had some sort of had been out walking the trails and had run into some big footy kind of activity. And that morning at 4 a.m., they looked outside the window and they saw Sasquatch looking in the window with glowing eyes, and they all went back to sleep. It's like, what?
Yeah.
Why the heck would you do that? That makes no sense. And similar to the thing that Mike talks about, Mike Clellan talks about in his one of his encounters, where he woke up in the middle of the night and saw this floodlight pouring in through his window and gray aliens walking toward the bedroom, and he just puts his head back on the pillow and goes to sleep. He hears a voice in his head telling him to go to sleep. So I think that's another interesting thread that can be pulled on.
Yeah, that's true. And like that, where you say these things don't, like I said, whatever it said didn't make sense. But to me, it was sort of a commentary of this stuff can sound like whatever it wants to sound like. The fact that it sounded like a tape recorder, even though I still think Grant planted a tape recorder. The fact that it sounded like a tape recorder doesn't automatically disqualify it as being a normal sound.
Right.
I guess it was my takeaway from it. But yeah, there's definitely something to that. I mean, you hear, I've definitely heard a number of stories where people will say, oh, something really weird was happening. And then you go, and then what? Oh, I think I went to sleep. Really? Yeah.
Yeah, that really,
or they completely forget it is the other thing. Like they'll completely forget it even happened. This thing, scares the hell out of them, and then years later, something triggers the memory, and they're like, "Oh yeah, remember that time?"
Exactly. No, that's exactly true. And it's, to me, that's I put that in the high strangeness box. And I think that
yes,
it's definitely suggestive of ideas of like altered states and of something acting directly on your consciousness.
Yeah, and I hadn't really thought about it that way, but you're absolutely right. And that would explain the lack of, hearing a weird, creepy voice coming from your closet should have been something that made me jump to my feet and open the closet door.
Yeah, or and stay up all night.
Or leave the room or something. And a number of things have happened like that where they just happen and I just go, okay. And I go back to sleep.
Yep. That's, I think that there's something there to that means something. So, I don't know what it means, but it means something.
And the not being able to remember something that should have been branded into your memory seems like a dream state, which is also an altered state. Because you can have the most phenomenal dream, and then if you don't focus on it, write it down, or something like that, you may forget it for years until something triggers the
Yeah,
memory of it.
that's an excellent point too. I think that there's a parallel there because like sometimes I'll have a very intense dream or a very odd dream, and then I you know it'll be weeks later and I'll see something and it'll remind me of something that I saw in the dream, and then it'll come flooding back to me. Yeah, I think that's yeah. There's something to that.
And it must be the connection to altered states. We don't remember altered states the same way we remember our typical mental state when we're here in material reality.
Yeah, no, it has to be tied in with that somehow. Uh,
And that brings up the question: is how do we record memories when we're in altered states? Like, is the process the same? I mean, we don't really understand how we record memories to begin with, necessarily. Um, but I wonder how different it is when you're in another state of consciousness.
well, yeah, I think that everything. I sort of touched on this last time I was on the show. Um, but I think that there's a lot about sleep that we just don't get yet. And I think I think it's kind of been well not blown out of the water, but I think this idea that dreams are just your way of sifting through your day is not is just it doesn't really resonate with me as a real truth. I think that there is some of that, obviously. You know,
Yes. Oh, there's definitely some of that.
there, my wife has a cutoff on when we can watch things sometimes, so that she doesn't end up end up
Dreaming about them.
having bizarre dreams. Yeah, exactly. Um, but at the same time, it's this idea of big dreams and little dreams, which I think you've talked about before.
Yes. Yeah, the Aboriginal idea.
Yeah, yeah, this idea that sometimes sometimes the cigar is not a cigar. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's and maybe that same logic applies to all these encounters that we talk about. Maybe there are big encounters and little encounters. Um,
True. True.
maybe there are certain interactions that don't have a greater meaning, and they are nonsensical, like your little dreams tend to be. And then sometimes you'll have encounters that are much stronger and are meant to be taken with you for the rest of your life.
Little glitches in reality that are just kind of like, what was that? All
Yeah,
right.
yeah, exactly.
Why was something yelling inside the car?
Yeah, that's a little encounter. Um,
Right. Little glitch in reality. Something bled through from somewhere else, and it's gone.
yeah, exactly.
It wasn't trying to communicate. It just happened.
It was a lark. It was a paranormal lark.
Entirely possible. Or maybe it's just there to show us the diversity that these things can manifest in.
Yeah, yeah.
If you try hard enough, you can find something to take away from everything.
That's well, yeah. That's true. That's true. Well, I mean, yeah. I was about to say something. I was about to use some sort of mundane uh mundane retort like, well, what do I learn from stubbing my toe? But don't shuffle your
Not to,
exactly.
yeah, don't do
Don't
it
shuffle
again.
your feet. Yeah,
I mean, it may not be anything significant, but it's something.
yeah,
And if you stub your toe twice in the same place, then you're really going, okay, things not to do.
yeah. Time to move the desk.
Right, right. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to end. And we can, like I said, we will be doing a show on night terrors as soon as we can get you, Mike, and Miguel on the same night's place.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, and that should be very, very interesting. I know Mike in particular had a lot he wanted to talk about as involves that stuff. And again, people should go watch The Nightmare. It is on Netflix. and I don't know where else, probably anywhere you can get films. And that should give you a good lead into what we're going to be talking about, where we're going to start with that, because I want to discuss some of the cases they had on there because they were very
Yeah,
interesting.
absolutely, absolutely. I'm actually looking forward to revisiting and refreshing it. It's that good, folks. Check it out.
Yes. Yeah, I got to as well because I didn't take notes the first time, and there were definitely some points they made in there that I found very interesting.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Josh.
Hey, my pleasure, Soraya. Thanks so much.